Margaret Davies had served the royal family for 23 years. She had witnessed births, deaths, scandals, and celebrations behind the golden gates of Kensington Palace. She thought she had seen everything the monarchy could offer. She was wrong. On a cold February morning in 2024, while performing her routine security check of Prince Louis's private quarters, Margaret discovered something that would shatter her faith in the institution she had devoted her life to protecting. What she found hidden beneath the floorboards of the young prince's playroom wasn't toys or childhood treasures. It was evidence of a secret so dark, so unthinkable, that it would force her to choose between her loyalty to the crown and her duty to humanity. This is the true story of how one woman's discovery brought the most powerful family in Britain to their knees, and why the world will never look at the royal family the same way again. Margaret Davies pressed her security badge against the scanner outside Prince Louis's wing of Kensington Palace. The soft beep echoed through the marble corridor as she pushed open the heavy oak door. At 52, Margaret moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent over 2 decades navigating the secret passages and hidden rooms of royal residences. Her job as head of internal security meant she knew things about the royal family that would make front-page news around the world. She also knew how to keep those secrets buried. The morning of February 14, 2024, started like any other. Margaret's routine security sweep began at dawn, checking each room for anything out of place, any sign of intrusion, any detail that might threaten the safety of the royal children. Prince Louis, now 5 years old, had become particularly precious to the family after several concerning incidents that the public knew nothing about. As Margaret entered the prince's playroom, something felt different. The air carried an unusual mustiness, and there was a subtle creaking sound coming from the northeast corner where Louis kept his collection of vintage toy soldiers. She had checked this room hundreds of times before, but today her trained instincts told her something was wrong. The playroom itself was a marvel of childhood luxury. Hand-painted murals depicting scenes from British history covered the walls, while shelves lined with priceless antique toys created a museum-quality display. A massive Persian rug dominated the center of the room, its intricate patterns telling stories of ancient kingdoms, but Margaret's attention was drawn to a section of the wooden floor near the toy soldier display, where the boards seemed slightly misaligned. She knelt down and pressed her palm against the suspicious area. The wood gave way slightly under pressure, confirming her suspicions. Using a small toolkit she always carried, Margaret carefully pried up the loose floorboard. What she discovered underneath would haunt her for the rest of her life. Hidden in a specially constructed compartment were dozens of photographs, documents, and what appeared to be a leather-bound journal. The photographs showed locations Margaret didn't recognize, dark underground spaces, symbols carved into stone walls, and groups of people in elaborate ceremonial robes. But it was the journal that made her blood run cold. The first entry, written in Prince Louis's unmistakable childish handwriting, was dated 3 months earlier. The words were disturbing enough, but what made them truly terrifying was their matter-of-fact tone, as if a 5-year-old was describing something as normal as a tea party. "Today, Uncle Andrew taught me the special words again. He says when I turn 7, I get to meet the old ones like Papa did when he was little. Mama doesn't know about the special room under the chapel. Uncle Andrew says ladies aren't allowed because they don't understand the ancient ways." Margaret's hands trembled as she continued reading. Each entry detailed increasingly disturbing activities involving several adult members of the royal family and other high-profile individuals whose names she recognized from newspaper headlines. The journal described secret gatherings, ritual ceremonies, and practices that seemed to blend elements of ancient pagan traditions with something far more sinister. One entry particularly stood out. "The man with the funny accent brought the special children again. Uncle Andrew says they're helping us talk to the old ones. I don't like when they cry, but Uncle Andrew says crying makes the magic stronger. Papa was there too, but he looked sad. He told me this is what kings have always done to protect England." Margaret sat back on her heels, her mind racing. In all her years of service, she had encountered various royal eccentricities and cover-ups, but nothing had prepared her for this. The implications were staggering. If these journal entries were accurate, they suggested the involvement of senior royals in activities that went far beyond simple scandal. She photographed every page with her secure phone, her training taking over despite the emotional shock. As head of internal security, she knew the protocols for handling sensitive information, but this situation was unlike anything in the manual. The journal contained references to locations within royal properties she had never heard of, suggesting hidden areas even she wasn't aware of. The documents, mixed with the photographs, included what appeared to be membership lists for an organization called the Order of the Ancient Crown. The letterhead bore symbols that seemed to combine traditional royal heraldry with imagery that looked distinctly occult. Names on these lists included not only members of the royal family but also prominent politicians, judges, and business leaders from across the Commonwealth. Margaret noticed that several of the photographs showed the interior of what looked like a chapel, but not any chapel she recognized from the official royal properties. The architecture was older, more primitive, with stone walls bearing carved symbols that seemed to predate Christianity. In one photograph, she could make out figures in elaborate robes gathered around what appeared to be an altar. The most disturbing photograph showed Prince Louis himself, dressed in a small white robe, standing next to several adult figures whose faces were obscured by ceremonial masks. The child's expression was unnaturally calm for someone his age in such a strange setting. Behind them, Margaret could see other children, some appearing much younger than Louis, their faces showing signs of distress. As she continued examining the evidence, Margaret began to piece together a pattern of activities that had apparently been ongoing for generations. The journal contained references to the family tradition and mentioned that Prince William had participated in similar ceremonies as a child, though he had apparently lost the calling as he grew older. One entry detailed a conversation between Prince Louis and someone referred to only as the Keeper. The Keeper says, "Our family has protected England's power for 1,000 years. He showed me the old pictures of great-great-grandfather doing the ceremonies. He says the old ones made our family special, but we have to feed them to keep the magic strong." Margaret realized she was looking at evidence of what appeared to be an organized network operating within the highest levels of British society. The sophistication of the hidden compartment and the formal nature of the documentation suggested this wasn't the work of a disturbed individual, but rather a coordinated effort involving multiple participants. The financial implications alone were staggering. Several documents appeared to be receipts for large cash transactions, payments made to individuals identified only by code names. There were also travel records showing private flights to remote locations, often coinciding with dates mentioned in Prince Louis's journal entries. As Margaret prepared to leave the playroom, she heard footsteps approaching down the corridor. Quickly, she replaced the floorboard and arranged the toys to look undisturbed. Her heart pounded as she recognized the voices. Prince William and Catherine were returning earlier than expected from their morning engagement. She managed to exit through a service corridor just as the royal couple entered Louis's wing. But as she made her way back to her office, Margaret knew her life had fundamentally changed. She was now in possession of information that could destroy the monarchy, end careers, and potentially expose what appeared to be serious crimes involving children. The weight of her discovery pressed down on her as she sat in her office, staring at the photographs on her phone. Margaret had always prided herself on her discretion and loyalty, but this situation challenged everything she believed about her duty. The evidence suggested that Prince Louis, an innocent 5-year-old, was being indoctrinated into practices that no child should ever witness. She thought about her own grandchildren, safe in their ordinary lives, unaware of the dark secrets hidden behind the palace walls. The contrast between their innocent world and what she had just discovered made her feel physically sick. Margaret knew she stood at a crossroads. She could follow protocol, report her findings to her superiors, and trust the system to handle the situation appropriately. Or she could acknowledge that this situation was beyond the normal scope of royal scandal and required intervention from outside the establishment. As the day progressed and she went through the motions of her regular duties, Margaret couldn't shake the images from her mind. The matter-of-fact tone of a 5-year-old describing what appeared to be ritual abuse haunted every conversation she had with her colleagues. When Prince Louis himself appeared in the corridor later that afternoon, chatting happily with his nanny about his upcoming birthday party, Margaret had to excuse herself to avoid breaking down. The innocent little boy skipping down the marble hallway bore no resemblance to the child described in the journal entries. Yet Margaret knew that children often compartmentalize traumatic experiences, presenting a normal facade while carrying unimaginable burdens. That evening, as Margaret prepared to leave the palace, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going home to her quiet cottage in Windsor, she drove to London and checked into a hotel under a false name. She needed time to think, away from the palace walls and the weight of royal tradition. In the anonymity of the hotel room, Margaret spread out printouts of the photographs and documents she had copied. Under the harsh fluorescent lighting, the evidence looked even more damning. She realized she was holding proof of activities that went far beyond anything the public had ever imagined about the royal family. The question that haunted her as she fell into a restless sleep was simple. What price was she willing to pay for the truth? Margaret woke before dawn in the sterile hotel room, the weight of her discovery pressing down like a physical force. She had spent the night analyzing every photograph and document, trying to understand the full scope of what she had uncovered. The evidence painted a picture of systematic abuse hidden behind centuries of royal tradition, but she needed more proof before taking any irreversible action. She returned to Kensington Palace that morning with a plan. Using her security clearance, Margaret began a systematic exploration of areas she had never fully investigated. The journal entries had mentioned the special room under the chapel, and she was determined to find it. The Chapel Royal at St. James's Palace had always been off-limits during certain periods, officially for private royal worship. Margaret had never questioned these restrictions before, but now they took on a sinister significance. She studied the building's architectural plans in the security office, comparing them with the layout she remembered from her 23 years of service. What she discovered was disturbing. The official blueprints showed a simple chapel structure, but her careful measurements revealed significant discrepancies. There appeared to be additional space beneath the building that wasn't accounted for in any documentation she could access. During her lunch break, Margaret used her administrative access to review staff schedules and visitor logs for the chapel over the past year. A pattern emerged that made her stomach turn. Regular maintenance sessions were scheduled during school holidays, when the royal children would be present at various properties. These sessions involved staff members she didn't recognize, individuals who weren't part of the regular security or housekeeping teams. The visitor logs contained names that matched some of the individuals mentioned in Prince Louis's journal. Sir Edmund Blackthorne, listed as a historical consultant, appeared on the schedule monthly. Margaret had never encountered this man during her regular duties, despite his apparent frequent access to royal properties. She decided to investigate Blackthorne's background. Using her security credentials, she accessed databases that revealed a troubling pattern. Blackthorne had connections to several organizations that, while legal, operated in the shadowy world of occult societies and historical preservation groups with unusual interests. His academic credentials were impressive but concerning. Blackthorne held degrees in ancient history and religious studies, with a particular focus on pre-Christian British traditions. His published papers included titles like Ritual Sacrifice in Ancient Celtic Society and The Preservation of Sacred Knowledge Through Royal Bloodlines. More disturbing was Blackthorne's financial history. Despite his academic background, he maintained an expensive lifestyle that seemed impossible on a professor's salary. Property records showed he owned several remote estates across Scotland and Wales, properties that might correspond to some of the locations shown in the photographs she had discovered. Margaret's investigation revealed that Blackthorne wasn't alone. The visitor logs contained a network of individuals with similar backgrounds, all granted regular access to royal properties under various professional pretenses. Dr. Helena Ravencroft, listed as a child development specialist, had been seeing Prince Louis regularly for the past 2 years. When Margaret looked into Ravencroft's credentials, she found a troubling mix of legitimate qualifications and associations with fringe psychological theories. Ravencroft's published work included research on inherited trauma responses and the psychological preparation of children for adult responsibilities. Her patient list, while confidential, included several children from prominent families across Europe. The more Margaret dug, the more she realized she was looking at a sophisticated network that had infiltrated the highest levels of society. These weren't random individuals acting independently. They were part of an organized system that had apparently been operating for generations. Her investigation led her to examine financial records she had never accessed before. Using her administrative privileges, Margaret discovered a series of accounts that didn't appear in any official royal financial documentation. These accounts showed regular transfers to individuals and organizations that matched the names from Prince Louis's journal and the visitor logs. One account, labeled simply as Heritage Preservation, had dispensed over £2 million in the past year alone. The recipients included Blackthorne, Ravencroft, and several other individuals whose names appeared throughout her investigation. But the most shocking discovery was that these payments were authorized by Prince Andrew himself. Margaret realized she needed to understand Prince Andrew's role in this network. His public troubles had been well documented, but this evidence suggested his problems went far deeper than anyone had imagined. The journal entries consistently referred to Uncle Andrew as the primary instructor in whatever activities were taking place. She began monitoring Prince Andrew's movements more carefully, using the palace's comprehensive security system to track his activities. What she discovered was a pattern of behavior that had gone unnoticed because of his legitimate access to royal properties. Prince Andrew made regular visits to areas of royal estates that were supposedly unused or under renovation. These visits often coincided with the arrival of the individuals from Margaret's investigation. He would disappear for hours at a time, often emerging from directions that didn't correspond to any official building or activity. One afternoon, Margaret decided to follow Prince Andrew during one of these mysterious absences. Using her knowledge of the palace's service corridors and hidden passages, she tracked him as he made his way to what appeared to be a maintenance entrance to St. James's Chapel. From her concealed position, Margaret watched as Prince Andrew produced an ornate key and unlocked a door she had never noticed before, hidden behind decorative stonework. He disappeared into what was clearly an entrance to the underground area her measurements had suggested existed. Margaret waited until she was certain he was gone before examining the hidden door. The stonework was old, much older than the chapel above, suggesting this entrance predated the current building. The symbols carved around the doorframe matched some of the imagery she had seen in the photographs from Prince Louis's hiding place. She knew she couldn't follow Prince Andrew underground without risking discovery, but she could investigate the area from above. Using ground-penetrating radar equipment from the Palace Maintenance Department, Margaret conducted what she officially logged as a structural integrity survey of the chapel area. The results confirmed her worst fears. Beneath the chapel lay an extensive network of rooms and corridors, far more elaborate than anything that should exist under a simple religious building. The underground structure appeared to include several large chambers, connected by passages that extended toward other royal properties. Margaret's technical analysis revealed that these underground areas had been modified recently. New electrical systems had been installed, along with ventilation equipment that would allow the spaces to be used regularly by groups of people. This wasn't an abandoned historical curiosity. It was an active, modern facility hidden beneath one of Britain's most iconic religious sites. She began correlating the underground layout with the dates and times from Prince Louis's journal entries. The pattern that emerged suggested regular gatherings in these hidden spaces, always during periods when the royal children were present at nearby properties. Margaret's investigation expanded to include other royal properties mentioned in the documentation. Using satellite imagery and architectural records, she identified similar discrepancies at Sandringham Estate and Balmoral Castle. Each property appeared to contain underground facilities that weren't reflected in any official documentation. The scope of the network was becoming clear. This wasn't an isolated incident involving a few disturbed individuals. It was a systematic operation that spanned multiple locations and involved significant infrastructure investment. The level of organization suggested institutional support at the highest levels of the royal establishment. Margaret's most disturbing discovery came when she accessed historical records dating back several decades. Similar patterns of unusual visitor access and financial irregularities appeared consistently throughout the records, suggesting this network had been operating for far longer than she had initially imagined. Documents from the 1980s and 1990s showed that previous generations of royal children had been involved in similar activities. Names that were now prominent in British society appeared in historical visitor logs as children, accompanying their parents to the same educational sessions that Prince Louis was now attending. The implications were staggering. Margaret was looking at evidence of what appeared to be a multi-generational system of indoctrination and abuse that had produced many of Britain's current leaders. The network's influence extended far beyond the royal family into the highest levels of government, judiciary, and business. As Margaret compiled her evidence, she realized she was documenting not just individual crimes, but a systematic corruption of British society's most powerful institutions. The evidence suggested that many of the people who made decisions affecting millions of citizens had been shaped by experiences similar to what Prince Louis was now enduring. The weight of this knowledge was overwhelming. Margaret found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about the country she had served faithfully for decades. How many political decisions, legal judgments, and business practices had been influenced by individuals who had been indoctrinated into this network as children? She began to understand why the network had operated undetected for so long. Its members occupied positions of power throughout society, creating a web of mutual protection and shared silence. Anyone who attempted to expose the truth would face opposition from the very institutions supposedly designed to protect the public. Margaret's investigation had revealed the existence of a shadow power structure that operated parallel to Britain's official government and institutions. The network's influence explained many previously inexplicable aspects of British politics and society, from policy decisions that seemed to serve no public interest to legal outcomes that defied logic. As she prepared for the next phase of her investigation, Margaret knew she was entering dangerous territory. The evidence she had gathered would threaten some of the most powerful people in Britain. She needed to be careful about how she proceeded, but she also knew that Prince Louis and potentially other children were in immediate danger. The question that haunted her was whether she could find allies within the system who weren't compromised by the network's influence. She needed people in positions of authority who could act on her evidence without being silenced or discredited by the very individuals she was investigating. Margaret realized that her next steps would determine not only her own fate, but potentially the future of British society itself. The evidence she had uncovered could expose a corruption so deep and pervasive that it might fundamentally change how the public viewed their most trusted institutions. But first, she needed to find a way to protect Prince Louis and any other children who might be at risk. The innocent little boy she had seen skipping down the palace corridors deserved better than the fate the network had planned for him. Margaret knew she couldn't proceed alone. The network she had uncovered was too powerful and too well connected for a single person to challenge successfully. She needed allies, but finding trustworthy people within the establishment seemed nearly impossible when she didn't know how far the corruption extended. Her first instinct was to approach Scotland Yard, but her investigation had revealed that several high-ranking police officials appeared in the visitor logs she had analyzed. The traditional channels of law enforcement seemed compromised at the highest levels. Margaret decided to start with someone she had worked with for years but who had never shown any signs of being connected to the network. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen had been her primary contact in the Metropolitan Police for security matters involving the royal family. Chen had always struck Margaret as genuinely committed to protecting children. Having spent most of her career investigating crimes against minors, Margaret arranged a meeting with Chen at a small cafe in Camden, far from the usual circles where either of them might be recognized. She brought copies of the least damaging evidence, enough to demonstrate the seriousness of the situation without immediately implicating the highest levels of the royal family. Chen's reaction was exactly what Margaret had hoped for. The detective's face grew pale as she reviewed the photographs and journal entries, her professional composure cracking as she absorbed the implications. Chen had investigated enough child abuse cases to recognize the signs, and what Margaret was showing her matched patterns she had seen in the most serious cases of her career. "How long has this been going on?" Chen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Based on what I've found, possibly decades," Margaret replied. "But I need help to understand the full scope. These people have connections everywhere. I don't know who can be trusted." Chen studied the documents again, her detective's mind already working on the investigative challenges they would face. "We need someone with access to resources and authority that can't be influenced by the usual channels, someone outside the British establishment." Margaret had been thinking along similar lines. The international nature of some of the evidence suggested that foreign authorities might be willing to act where British institutions might be compromised. Chen agreed to make discreet inquiries through international police networks, particularly with agencies that specialized in crimes against children. Meanwhile, Margaret continued her investigation within the palace, but now with a growing sense of urgency. Prince Louis's journal entries had mentioned that something significant was planned for his 7th birthday, still more than a year away. But other entries suggested more immediate activities that concerned her deeply. She began monitoring Prince Louis more closely during her regular duties, looking for signs of distress or behavioral changes that might indicate ongoing abuse. What she observed broke her heart. The cheerful, energetic child she had known was displaying subtle signs of stress that would be invisible to anyone not specifically looking for them. Margaret noticed that Prince Louis had developed nervous habits that hadn't been present before. He frequently touched a small pendant he wore under his clothes, and he seemed unusually anxious when separated from familiar adults. More concerning was his reaction to certain words or phrases that appeared innocuous but seemed to trigger immediate changes in his behavior. During one observation, Margaret watched as Prince Louis's tutor mentioned something about ancient traditions in a history lesson. The 5-year-old's immediate response was to sit perfectly still, his face assuming an unnaturally mature expression that seemed completely wrong for a child his age. Margaret realized that Prince Louis had been conditioned to respond to specific triggers, suggesting a level of psychological manipulation that required professional expertise. This wasn't random abuse, but a systematic program designed to shape the child's development in specific ways. Her investigation led her to Dr. Rebecca Mills, a child psychologist who had written extensively about ritual abuse and psychological conditioning of children. Dr. Mills worked independently and had no apparent connections to the royal establishment or the network Margaret had uncovered. Margaret approached Dr. Mills carefully, presenting herself as a social worker concerned about a case involving potential ritual abuse. She provided enough details for the psychologist to understand the severity of the situation without immediately revealing the royal connection. Dr. Getting. Mills's response confirmed Margaret's worst fears. The evidence suggested a sophisticated program of psychological conditioning that typically took years to implement successfully. The combination of isolation, special treatment, and gradual exposure to disturbing activities was designed to normalize abnormal behavior and create complete compliance. Children subjected to this type of conditioning often develop what appears to be 2 separate personalities, Dr. Mills explained during their consultation. They can function normally in everyday situations while completely accepting abnormal behavior in the conditioning environment. It's a form of dissociation that protects the child's mind but also makes them extremely vulnerable to continued exploitation. Margaret learned that recovery from this type of conditioning was possible, but required immediate intervention and specialized treatment. The longer a child remained in the conditioning environment, the more difficult it became to undo the psychological damage. Armed with this professional assessment, Margaret reached out to Chen again. The detective had made progress through her international contacts. Investigators from Interpol and the FBI had expressed serious interest in the evidence, particularly the international connections suggested by some of the documentation. Chen had also identified a potential ally within the British system. Sir James Morrison, a retired judge known for his integrity and independence, had agreed to review the evidence confidentially. Morrison had a reputation for taking on powerful interests when children were at risk, and his retirement meant he was less vulnerable to professional pressure. The meeting with Sir James took place at his private residence, away from any official buildings that might be monitored. Margaret presented her complete evidence package, including the photographs, financial records, and her analysis of the network structure. Sir James's reaction was a mixture of horror and grim determination. As someone who had spent decades in the legal system, he understood better than anyone the challenges they would face in pursuing justice against such powerful individuals. "The evidence is compelling, but we need to be strategic about how we proceed," Sir James explained. "These people have the resources to destroy reputations, manipulate media coverage, and influence legal proceedings. We need to build an airtight case before making any public moves." Sir James agreed to use his contacts to quietly build a coalition of trustworthy officials who could act when the time was right. He emphasized the need for absolute secrecy until they were ready to move decisively. Margaret's investigation took on new urgency when she discovered that Prince Louis was scheduled for a private educational retreat at one of Prince Andrew's Scottish properties. The timing coincided with school holidays, and the guest list included several individuals from her investigation. She realized this might be the opportunity to gather additional evidence, but it also meant Prince Louis would be in immediate danger. Margaret had to balance the need for more proof with her responsibility to protect an innocent child. Working with Chen and Dr. Sissom Mills, Margaret developed a plan to document the activities at the Scottish property while ensuring Prince Louis's safety. Chen arranged for specialized surveillance equipment through her Interpol contacts, while Dr. Mills provided guidance on how to gather evidence of psychological abuse without further traumatizing the child. Margaret's access to royal security systems would allow her to monitor the property remotely and coordinate with outside authorities if intervention became necessary. But she knew that once she activated this plan, there would be no going back. The network would realize they had been discovered, and the consequences for everyone involved would be severe. As Margaret prepared for the Scottish operation, she reflected on how much her life had changed since finding Prince Louis's hidden journal. She had gone from being a loyal servant of the royal family to potentially exposing one of the biggest scandals in British history. But her motivation remained clear. Every time she saw Prince Louis in the palace corridors, every time she observed his conditioned responses to certain stimuli, she was reminded that this wasn't about politics or institutions. It was about protecting a child who couldn't protect himself. Margaret's team had grown to include international investigators, child psychology experts, and retired officials with unshakable integrity. But she was acutely aware that they were up against a network with centuries of experience in protecting its secrets and eliminating threats. The Scottish operation would be their first real test. If they could successfully gather evidence from the retreat without being detected, they would have proof of active crimes that could trigger immediate law enforcement action. If they were discovered, Margaret knew that she and her allies would face consequences they might not survive. Sir James had been frank about the dangers they faced. "These people have killed to protect their secrets before," he warned. "We must assume they will do so again if they feel sufficiently threatened." Margaret understood the risks, but she also understood that doing nothing would condemn Prince Louis and potentially other children to continued abuse. The evidence she had uncovered suggested that the network was actively recruiting new victims and expanding its operations. As she finalized preparations for the Scottish operation, Margaret thought about the conversation she had overheard between Prince Louis and his nanny the previous week. The child had asked innocently when he would be old enough to help Papa protect England like Uncle Andrew does. That innocent question had crystallized Margaret's resolve. Prince Louis still believed he was part of something noble and important. He didn't understand that he was being groomed for something that would destroy his innocence and potentially his life. Margaret's mission was no longer just about exposing a criminal network. It was about saving a little boy who still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. She was determined to make sure his story would have won, no matter the cost to herself or the institution she had served faithfully for 23 years. The Scottish retreat was scheduled to begin in 3 days. Margaret knew that everything she and her allies had worked for would be decided in the next week. Either they would succeed in gathering the evidence needed to protect Prince Louis and expose the network, or they would fail and potentially make the situation worse for everyone involved. As she prepared for what might be her final mission as a royal security officer, Margaret made peace with her decision. Some things were more important than loyalty to institutions or personal safety. The protection of innocent children was one of those things. The Scottish retreat was set at Ravenshollow Estate, one of Prince Andrew's remote properties in the Highlands that rarely appeared in official royal schedules. Margaret arrived 2 days early under the pretense of conducting advanced security preparations, giving her time to install the surveillance equipment Chen had provided through Interpol channels. The estate itself was unsettling. The main house dated back to the 18th century, but recent renovations had added modern amenities while preserving an atmosphere that felt deliberately ominous. Margaret's technical scans revealed the same pattern she had discovered at other locations: underground facilities that weren't shown on any architectural plans. Working through the night, Margaret positioned micro cameras and audio devices throughout the areas where activities were most likely to take place. The equipment was military-grade, designed to be virtually undetectable while providing crystal-clear evidence of whatever occurred. Prince Louis arrived on Friday afternoon with his nanny and a small security detail that Margaret recognized. but had never worked with directly. The child seemed excited about the special holiday, chattering happily about the countryside and the old castle. Margaret's heart broke watching his innocent enthusiasm for what she knew would likely be a traumatic experience. The other guests began arriving Friday evening. Sir Edmund Blackthorne came first, carrying several large cases that Margaret's scans revealed contained ceremonial objects made from precious metals. Dr. Dixie, Helena Ravencroft, arrived with her own equipment, including what appeared to be medical monitoring devices. Prince Andrew's arrival changed the atmosphere immediately. Margaret watched through her surveillance system as his presence transformed the other guests from casual visitors into something resembling a religious congregation. The deference they showed him suggested he held a position of significant authority within the network. Saturday morning brought the arrival of 3 more individuals Margaret hadn't encountered in her previous investigation. A woman introduced only as the mother appeared to be the eldest member of the group, carrying herself with an authority that even Prince Andrew seemed to respect. 2 younger men, apparently brothers, completed the gathering. Margaret monitored their activities throughout Saturday, documenting preparations that confirmed her worst fears. The group was preparing for some kind of ceremony that would involve Prince Louis as a central participant. The child seemed excited by the special attention, unaware that he was being prepared for something sinister. The surveillance equipment captured conversations that revealed the true nature of the network's activities. They weren't simply engaging in unusual religious practices. They were part of an organized system that used ritual abuse to maintain psychological control over individuals who would eventually occupy positions of power throughout British society. Margaret learned that the network called itself the Order of the Ancient Crown and claimed to trace its origins back to pre-Norman conquest Britain. According to their beliefs, they were the guardians of ancient knowledge that had kept Britain powerful for centuries. The abuse of children wasn't incidental to their practices. It was the foundation of their power structure. The conversations revealed that Prince Louis was considered especially significant because of his position in the line of succession. The network believed that conditioning him properly would ensure their continued influence over the monarchy for another generation. Prince William's apparent rejection of the network's practices had created a crisis that they hoped to resolve through his youngest son. Saturday evening brought the beginning of the actual ceremonies. Margaret watched in horror as Prince Louis was dressed in ceremonial robes and led to the underground chambers she had detected. The surveillance equipment captured everything: the chanting, the symbols, the gradual escalation of psychological manipulation designed to break down the child's resistance to what was happening. Margaret had to force herself to continue monitoring rather than intervening immediately. She knew that stopping this one ceremony wouldn't protect Prince Louis in the long term if the network remained intact. She needed complete evidence of their activities before taking action. The ceremony involved multiple stages designed to gradually normalize increasingly disturbing behavior. Prince Louis was praised for his participation and told repeatedly that he was helping to protect England's greatness. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated, designed to make the child feel proud of his involvement rather than victimized. Margaret documented everything while coordinating with her allies outside the estate. Chen had positioned law enforcement teams at strategic locations around the property, while Sir James was preparing legal documents that would authorize immediate intervention when the time was right. The breakthrough moment came when the surveillance equipment captured Prince Andrew explaining the network's broader operations to Prince Louis. In his eagerness to impress the child with the importance of what they were doing, Prince Andrew revealed details about other participants, other locations, and the network's influence throughout British society. Margaret now had evidence not just of child abuse but of a comprehensive conspiracy that involved corruption at the highest levels of government, law enforcement, and the judiciary. The recordings would provide prosecutors with enough evidence to bring down the entire network. Sunday morning brought the ceremony's climax, and Margaret made the decision to intervene. She couldn't allow Prince Louis to be subjected to any more trauma. Regardless of the strategic implications, she activated the emergency response plan she had developed with her allies. Law enforcement teams moved simultaneously on multiple locations across Britain. While officers stormed Raven's Hollow estate, other teams executed search warrants at properties belonging to network members throughout the country. The coordination was perfect, preventing any opportunity for evidence to be destroyed or participants to escape. Margaret's role in the operation put her in direct confrontation with Prince Andrew for the first time since beginning her investigation. His reaction confirmed everything she had suspected about his central role in the network. Instead of showing concern for Prince Louis's welfare, he was furious about the betrayal of family loyalty and the destruction of traditions that had supposedly protected Britain for centuries. Prince Louis's rescue required careful handling by the specialized child psychology team that Dr. Mills had assembled. The boy was confused and frightened by the sudden intervention, having been conditioned to see his participation in the ceremonies as normal and important. Margaret's heart broke as she watched the child's attempts to convince the officers that he was helping protect England. The media response to the arrests was unprecedented. Initial reports focused on the child abuse allegations, but as more evidence emerged, the story evolved into something much larger. The network's influence throughout British society became clear as more participants were identified and arrested. Margaret found herself at the center of a media storm she had never anticipated. Her decision to investigate and expose the network made her both a hero to child protection advocates and a villain to those who saw her actions as a betrayal of the institution she had sworn to protect. The legal proceedings that followed were complex and contentious. Defense attorneys argued that the network's activities were protected religious practices, while prosecutors presented evidence of systematic child abuse and corruption. Margaret's testimony was crucial in establishing the pattern of criminal behavior that had operated under the guise of tradition and patriotism. Prince Louis's recovery became a priority for everyone involved in his rescue. Dr. Mills designed a specialized treatment program to help him understand that he had been a victim rather than a participant in something noble. The process was slow and difficult, complicated by the sophisticated conditioning he had undergone. The royal family's response to the crisis revealed deep divisions that had apparently existed for years. Prince William publicly supported the investigation and prosecution of all participants, regardless of their status. His statement that protecting children must take precedence over protecting institutions became a defining moment in the scandal's aftermath. King Charles's response was more complex. While he publicly condemned the network's activities, sources close to the palace suggested he was struggling with revelations about his own brother's involvement and the implications for the monarchy's reputation. The suggestion that these practices had continued for generations raised questions about his own childhood experiences that he wasn't prepared to address publicly. Margaret's investigation ultimately led to convictions for more than 30 individuals, including several members of parliament, high-ranking police officials, and prominent business leaders. Prince Andrew received the longest sentence, reflecting both his leadership role in the network and his direct involvement in child abuse. The broader implications of the scandal reshaped British society in ways that continued long after the initial arrests. Public confidence in traditional institutions was severely damaged, leading to demands for transparency and accountability that previous generations would never have imagined. Margaret retired from royal service but continued working with international organizations dedicated to protecting children from ritual abuse and trafficking. Her experience investigating the network had revealed that similar organizations operated in other countries, often with connections to British networks that predated her investigation. Prince Louis's story became a symbol of resilience and recovery. Under the care of specialists and with the support of his parents, he gradually overcame the psychological conditioning he had endured. His recovery gave hope to other victims of similar networks around the world. The investigation also revealed the existence of other children who had been subjected to the network's practices over the years. Many of these individuals, now adults in positions of power throughout British society, came forward to seek help in dealing with their own traumatic experiences. Margaret's decision to investigate Prince Louis's hidden journal had consequences she could never have anticipated. What began as a routine security check had evolved into an investigation that exposed one of the most significant criminal conspiracies in British history. As she reflected on the events years later, Margaret remained convinced that she had made the right choice. The price of silence would have been too high, not just for Prince Louis but for all the future children who would have been victimized by a network that showed no signs of stopping its activities. The scandal permanently changed the relationship between the British public and their most trusted institutions. The revelation that criminal networks could operate undetected at the highest levels of society forced a national conversation about accountability, transparency, and the protection of children that continued to influence British politics and culture. Margaret's courage in choosing truth over loyalty had saved Prince Louis and exposed a network that had operated in the shadows for generations. Her story became a reminder that sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that require us to choose between competing loyalties, and that protecting the innocent must always take precedence over protecting institutions. The investigation she initiated continued to yield results years after the initial arrests, as international law enforcement agencies used the evidence to expose similar networks in other countries. Margaret's decision to document everything carefully had provided a blueprint for investigating and prosecuting criminal organizations that had previously seemed untouchable. In the end, Margaret's legacy was defined not by her 23 years of loyal service to the royal family, but by her willingness to risk everything to protect a 5-year-old boy who couldn't protect himself. Her story proved that ordinary people could still make extraordinary differences, even when facing the most powerful forces in society.